college and get my master's in 1960. The Virgin Islands was at the beginning of a transformation that made it quite different from the Virgin Islands in which I had grown up. Those of you who know history know, of course, that Castro would take over Cuba in 1959. By 1960, he had started doing things like confiscating American properties, which of course ended the relationship between the United States and Cuba. And Cuba had been the #1 tourist destination for Americans in the Caribbean. So then, of course, we would end up taking that position. Governor Paiwanski also became governor in '61, and he was really a very proactive governor, accomplished a number of things, not only the beginning of UVI, but he would use his various political and economic connections to bring as much tourism here as he could, to start the big industries like the Hess Company here in St. Croix, like there was a Harvey Alumina Company in St. Croix. I think they were the ones who gave a lot of the money for the renovation of this building. This building used to be the Harvey building, correct? So then the Virgin Islands at the beginning of the 60s were on the, let's say at the initial stages of an economic revolution which would change these islands, made us the #1 tourist sport, and made us one of the richest places in the Caribbean. And when money is flourishing, people always were looking for work. So then that would lead to a great deal of migration to the Virgin Islands. From other Caribbean islands, many persons would come in from, Anguilla, St. Kitts, Antigua, other islands, Dominica and so on. And then on the other hand, many white persons came in from the United States in order to take care of the new business opportunities. They would come in and they would open restaurants and bars and, the gift shops and all of that. So that by the mid-1960s, really, the Virgin Islands had become quite a different place than what it had been before. So then it ended up causing a lot of the feelings at UVI that would lead to the takeover of the library. Many of the students, just in addition to the fact that they did not think that enough black faculty were being hired, some of them were very angry about the changes that they saw economically on the island. There was the feeling that whites were taking control of many of the industries, and that they too were practicing some amount of racial discrimination, not hiring blacks, or if they did hire blacks, they did it at a lower salary than our whites got. So then during the 1960s, there was a great deal of turmoil, both nationally and locally. Because remember, nationally, you would have the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968. And a great deal of the turmoil is going on. So then it would be the type of thing that would lead to the takeover of the library in 1972. And then remember, 3 months before the takeover of the library, there had also been another very explosive situation in the Virgin Islands. In September of 1972, we had what came to be known as the Fountain Valley Massacre in St. Croix, where you would have 5 young men were convicted of going to a Rockefeller-owned resort over there and shooting 8 persons, 7 of whom were white. So all of these things, let's just say, together ended up making for a very uneasy atmosphere in the 1960s. And I think there were many people who maybe had not thought much about race relations before, who ended up definitely realizing how very much they were affected by it at that time and thinking about it. So what has happened is that the Virgin Islands, I think very presently, we've undergone a number of our changes that have us in a very really terrible position. You would have, of course, in the first decade of this century, you would have a recession in the United States, which ended up affecting us very badly. And then the Hess Company in St. Croix would decide to close the oil refinery over there. And other places in the Caribbean ended up seeing how well we were doing in tourist accommodations. And of course, they built nice piers and they invited tourists too. So that at one time there were just a few places that ships used to stop in the Caribbean. Now there are many islands that have very good tourist accommodation facilities, and ships go there too. So then St. Thomas is no longer the #1 tourist attraction, and things have gotten pretty bad, and I think we were aware of that even before the hurricanes. But because people were talking about the possibility of GERS or retirement system going bankrupt, that there were a number of other factors that we didn't have money for this and we didn't have money for that. And of course, what Irma and Maria did is that they multiplied these situations. So then, what I'd simply like us to think about for the next couple minutes before I sit down is how do we handle the challenges that we've really had in the past couple of years, now intensified by the effects of Irma and Maria. There are so many things that need to be done, and I'll throw out a couple of things that need to be done. One of the things that I've noticed that has alarmed me, in fact I mentioned in the book when I discussed real estate, that from back in 1968, one of the major real estate companies in St. Thomas, owned by Mr. Moran, had written an article where he spoke about his business, the business of selling a land, enticing people from the States to come here and buy. And he mentioned that even many of the green areas that we see on the hills, that we may think are available, that they are not. That many of these areas have already been sold, and it's simply a matter of waiting until the people who want to build on them, when they retire and they come to finally build on them. And he ended up actually making the statement in the article that the Virgin Islands had become so prized that they were not the place in the sun for people of modest means. So he was saying that the Virgin Islands were not the place for most of the people who lived in the Virgin Islands, because most of the people who lived in the Virgin Islands were people of modest means. And he said that people from here would have to go to places like Arizona and Florida, where land was cheap, but because the Virgin Islands was not that place. And so I think there has been a sort of systematic effort by the real estate industry. I won't say they're doing it out of hate. They're simply trying to get as much money in their pockets as they can. But the effect of it for black people in the Virgin Islands is that we are being priced out of the Virgin Islands. There's like an overall gentrification taking place, where the cost of land has gotten to the point that black persons can no longer afford to buy our land. In fact, about 2-3 years ago, there was a new, let us say, a new project that was given to our government to approve. A company apparently was buying the land at Mandel Bay. And they wanted to put up, they actually advertised it on full-page ads in the Daily News as a new community. I don't know what gives anyone the right to think that you can come and plot a new community in a place, where people already live. But they were saying they were building a new community of several hundred homes, very expensive homes, and a couple of hotels, and it also would have a marina. This would be a totally new community, removed from the rest of St. Thomas, and very racially different from the rest of St. Thomas. So I think what we have to think about is how do we, let us say, face these offers. How do we act when this type of thing come? We just can't say, oh, we just want to tell them go elsewhere and take your money. Because we have to admit, we do need the money But then I think we have to wonder how we're going to do it. One suggestion that I have, for example, I've been trying to think, is that when a developer comes with that type of idea, that type of proposal, I think we should have a law in which we can say, for every, let us say, luxury type home you build, you have to build a modest price home. So I'd like to ask you, I'm not a legal person. I don't know quite how we could do it. But people who are lawyers and who have the same concern, I wish you could think about it. That if you make that proposal to the government to build, let us say, 500 luxury type homes, that we said, well, you also have to build 500 modest, priced homes so that our people can be in on, having decent residence in the Virgin Islands. Another thing that's happening that has me greatly alarmed is how much we are not a part of some of the people who speak on behalf of the Virgin Islands. I don't know if you saw it, but in last week Wednesday's Daily News, there was a photograph of officials were visiting from the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, we are part of that area. And they had come here to meet with the heads of non-profit agencies to determine what kind of assistance that they thought might be needed, that they would recommend for non-profit agencies. So it was a picture that seemed to have maybe, it was a big, long, big oval table, seemed to have maybe about 18 or 19 people seated at the table. And as I was able to discern, I would think only 3, maybe 4 at the most, were black persons. So there you have a thing, a meeting concerned with aid for persons in the Virgin Islands who need special assistance. And there are very few people, hardly any of those representatives of those people to speak for them. I think this kind of thing is very wrong, but it could be that maybe we need to blame ourselves more for that. I think many of us need to decide that we are going to commit ourselves to doing a lot more than we have been doing. Because we have no dearth of problems in this place. No dearth of kids who are academically behind where they should be, need help. We have a lot of people who don't, they're Haitians and from the Dominican Republic who don't even speak the language, and they need people to help them to teach their children English, outside of the classroom. There are so many ways in which we can help. And I think a lot of us have not been doing enough. So I would urge us to make a commitment to get with other people in our churches, in our sororities, fraternities, just people in your neighborhood, your neighbors, or anybody you think might be interested. And so let us form a group and establish a schedule that we will work regularly to help the people who need this type of help, instead of just being mad that other people are doing it, when we should be doing more of it. Okay, I was just about to stop.
No, we're not doing questions. Sherry, we're doing questions after.
Could you repeat? I didn't hear you.
We're doing questions after. Yes, I'm sorry, but we have a question, 1 or 2 questions at the end. So if we just let Dr. Krieger.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. It's been, I hope I didn't disappoint you by not discussing too much of the book itself, but I thought, I would leave that to you. So it's been my pleasure speaking out with you. And again, I'd like to congratulate all of us who connected with UVI, I think, for how very much UVI has meant to this community. And in addition to taking on other forms of support, I'd like to urge you also to continue supporting UVI. Thank you very much.